Hi, everyone. It's Nathaniel again. Today, I wanted to do a tag that I saw floating around on the Booktubers network. I guess it was created by Gracefield Reads, and I also saw Carmen Janey give her answers to these questions, and I thought that it would be a good chance to fill some time and give a little more insight into who I am and where I'm coming from. So, the first question is, how did you or how do you decide which genre of book you read? This is actually one of my favorites because over the course of my reading life, I've had different genres that I've gone through. I had a very long period when I was a teenager that I was a huge fan of like Stephen King's books and similar books to that. And then when I got into college in the beginning as a literature student, because I was a literature student for the first couple of years of my college career, I started looking at more backlist classics, the modern classics, the 100 best of, and all of that. And then, of course, I was also introduced to a lot of authors that I had not been introduced before through the academic circles. And it gave me a chance to look at books in a different way than I had previously, where I was primarily just reading for pleasure and entertainment. Um, Fast forward, I went into the Army, and certain aspects of the Army, from being in different places around the world, and of course the experiences with the Army, gave me an idea of what I wanted to read. So I was reading things that were a little bit more outside of more of the American experience. And then whenever I went back to school, I was a science student. And when I finished my science degree, to keep up some of the information that I had learned, I was reading a lot of science related books about chemistry, about physics, about biology. And when I started getting out of some of those because I wanted to get back into more of the entertainment side, that's when I started reading science fiction for the first time as a regular recurrence. And so science fiction now is sort of my genre or my go to genre. I still read pretty much whatever picks my fancy. If I see it on the shelf, I will pick it up, and if it sounds good, I'll read it. But if there's a genre that I choose, it's definitely the science fiction, typically speaking. I also am big on, if I see a movie and it has a book that is related to it or was inspired by or it's an adaptation of, a lot of times I will pick up the book to see how it is translated in the book. And that actually started a long time ago before I really read science fiction, because I was watching 2001 Space Odyssey and really just didn't understand what was happening at the end of the movie. So I got Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 and read that, and it made more sense to me. And then, of course, I read a lot of other Arthur C. Clarke after that. Number two, which author is most like me? I I'm a little biased on this right now because I am currently reading Ian McEwan's The Children Act. I've read several of his, and the type of books that he writes are often about a misunderstanding or a conflict in a relationship, or how people are influenced by a circumstantial situation. And so while he's in my head, I am thinking that that's probably how I am, because I like the story of people. One of the things that I've really enjoyed about being in the Army actually is all the different people around our country that you end up coming in contact with. So unlike a normal institution where you get the job there and most of the people are from there, the Army, you can be in Germany, you can be in Korea, you can be in Hawaii, you can be in Florida, you can be in any of these different places, and you're meeting people who are also from all kinds of places, and you're working with them, and you're hearing different stories, and how we each experience things that are often shared, whether it's a combat environment or a deployed environment or a mobilization or humanitarian or whatever, is will determine how that individual takes in that story. And so I just like the stories of people, and I think that how that interaction goes is very appealing to me. So Ian McEwan, off the top of my head, I think of him. And I guess Ernest Hemingway, some of his, or a lot of his, are in a similar vein. It's really about those interactions and how we either enrich or hurt each other um, in those interactions. So that would be my answer to that one. Number three, if stranded on an island, which book would you take with you? This one is, of course, the ultimate hypothetical, because you always kind of wonder, if you took your favorite book, would you get tired of that book? So, what book could you take that you could reread over and over again and not get bored of? And I don't know that there is one. So, I'm going to say a book that I haven't read. I'm going to say Ulysses by James Joyce. It's one that I have gotten about half a page into, and that's about as far as I've gotten. And at some point, I do hope to tackle it. So if I were on a stranded island, I would absolutely get through that book. So I will say Ulysses by James Joyce. Number 4, do you like to buy books to read or because they look good on your bookshelf? So I actually like this question because obviously I buy books to read them. But one of the things that I like about having books versus just getting them from the library, which I also do, is that I like being able to revisit them because a lot of books will just the sight of the book will bring back memories, whether it's the impact that it had on you or the place that you were when you read them. I have several ones that keep coming to mind lately just because of circumstances in different places of where I was, I keep seeing people mention The Master and Margarita because I read that one back in like 2010 or 11, and I was in Green Bay at the time, and I don't remember that much about the book, which makes me want to go back and reread it, but I remember the snow in Green Bay while I was there. So interesting enough. And so whenever I see my books on the shelf, when I have them out, I'm currently not where I keep my books generally speaking, but when I have them or whenever I'm pulling them out of boxes because I've had to move a lot, then they always bring back memories. So it's not just the look uh, that I like on the shelf. I like being able to revisit, you know, and so that's yeah. I buy them for the entertainment, but I like being able to revisit. Number 5, what book, if you had read it 10 years ago, would have changed your life? Now, this one, the first one that came to mind was Born to Run by Christopher McDougall. I read that one, I think about 6 years ago now, and I wish that I had come across that book and the whole idea at least 5 years before because I really fell in love with trail running and I enjoyed running anyway, but my knees were already starting to get bad. And whenever I got into the trail running, I went with it, I went after it with gusto and really enjoyed it for about 5 years before my knees finally got to where I couldn't do it. So I would have liked to have really gotten into it sooner whenever I was a bit younger and a little less broken. And that book was the book that started off um, another series of books that I read. Scott Jurek's books have been really enjoyable and very inspirational. I read Once a Runner. I read a couple other ones that I can't remember right now, but they were just very inspirational and seeing what people can actually do and go through. And it got me into some of the running Instagram world. And so I was introduced to several people through there and just really appreciate what they are able to do and what some of the running um, community that they are a part of. And I wish that I had been a part of that sooner. Number 6, if there were only 3 books in the world, what would they be? So I'm going to take a bit of a feint on this one. I'm going to go with a type and then a couple that I think also are good examples to continue. So the type one is a book of poetry, and I don't really care what kind, whether it's old style Shelley Byron type stuff, or if it's more modern like Sarah Olds or Maya Angelou. I think a book of poetry has to be included, and then another book similar to like Galileo's Daughter. Galileo's Daughter is sort of a historical memoir biography sort of thing that Davis Sobel did, and it really talks about the perseverance of knowing what's right and also it deals with faith, which I think is an important part of the human condition, and it also deals with a certain amount of persecution that goes along with knowing what's right and keeping not letting um, the it's the persecution break you and everything. And then last but not least, I was trying to think of something that can give you an idea of some of the concerns that go on in the world. And the book that came to mind was Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. It, because it's a series of concentric stories that are, almost Russian dolled out to it, but the final message ultimately is really about how we take care of one another. And because it has that progression, even though it's different genres in different stories told in different voices throughout the whole book, and then it shows a progression of humanity as well. And so I think that it's a really good example of, if you were to only have three books in the world, how would they influence the community that you're in? That book of poetry, I think, is extremely important. I think something that deals with perseverance and also faith and science and everything like that, I think, is important. And then having a story that also shows a progression with an underlying theme of ultimately taking care of the community. So, Cloud Atlas, book of poetry, Galileo's daughter. That's a good. Number 7. If you could write about anything, what would it be? I have the series that I've been gestating for, I don't even know now, close to 15 years, I guess, um, that is about a pair of brothers who get involved in this situation that is ultimately going to retain or keep existence from being destroyed. And in the process of doing this, what their ultimate goal is actually saving their own father. And are about those interactions with people, and how chance encounters sometimes determine outcomes through follow-on choices. Okay. Number 8. What character is most like you? Immediately, the one that came to mind was Mr. Vane, who is the narrator or the protagonist from the book Lilith by George MacDonald. And I think because of his sort of melancholy yet inquisitive nature, and the way that he takes in some of his surroundings, and his acceptance, and his care for um, some of the other characters in the story, I think that is the one that I immediately goes to, because I think too often the books that I do read, the characters are just much bigger, and I think Mr. Vane shows a lot of my characteristics, quite honestly, throughout that book. So, Mr. Vane, Lilith, George MacDonald. Number 9. How do you plan out your YouTube content? I generally will go off of books that I've read, obviously, as I'm reading them. I'm still new to YouTube, so I'm still trying to determine exactly what I'm doing. But I like the idea of having connections to things. When I'm talking about the book, I'll also talk about maybe the movie adaptation of it, or I will reference another book that is either similar to or is in the same sort of field that I think is good. So right now, my planning is really on the fly. At some point, I hope to get a little bit better than that. I am working on getting to where, because I don't really have TBRs, I have piles. Those piles get interrupted because I will go to the library and I'll find something, or some new book comes out, or I'm bored and I go and get something at the used bookstore, or any number of things. So whenever I think of to be read, it's kind of hit and miss for me. And so I don't have any plan yet, and I really should. And because I don't really do the audiobook thing, I only read, and I'm a slow reader, then it takes me a little bit of time to actually get enough. So even my end of month, if I do an end of month wrap up, then it's going to have a lot fewer books than, maybe some other booktubers. So we'll just see. Hopefully over the course of time, whenever I get better at this, I'll have a better format and schedule. And then lastly, number 10, what book would you read to the world? This is a difficult one. Also, I mean, these are all pretty difficult. So The one that came to mind is a book called Only a Theory by Kenneth Miller. And this was one of the books that I had read whenever I finished my science degree. And it's about evolution, but it is also Kenneth Miller is a devout Catholic, and he had to serve as a expert witness for some trial. I don't remember which one now, but it might have been the Scopes trial. I can't remember. As a cell biologist, as a biologist professor or biology professor at Brown University, he has some extremely good lectures and everything. In this book, it's talking about the beauty of evolution and the different structures that are within it. And then at the end of the book, because it's a science book, and at the end of the book, there's a chapter that basically talks about his faith. And what I found so fascinating about it is that he really shows this beautiful, elegant, but somewhat messy, you know, method of biology, which of course translates to just about every other science as well. But then he also addresses finally at the end this controversy that we've created that there's a separation between science and faith. And I just I because I've read a lot of other evolution books, and some of them are written by the New Atheist, which I feel they focus a lot of times on belief systems too much, which is kind of ironic because in Kenneth Miller's book, Kenneth Miller as a believer doesn't focus on belief stuff in his science book. But the people who say that they have no faith belief system talk about belief a lot in their books. And to me, it's distracting. So the reason why I would like to read this to the world is that you can have faith and you can still believe in science. And if you look back at scientific inquiry and discovery, so much of it is connected to people of faith. Because a lot of times, especially the earlier ones, the people who had the time and money and capability to look into scientific things, like Galileo, like Darwin, like Mendel, these were all people who were connected to some institution that provided an income while they were studying science. And those were inevitably religious institutions. So that's my answer. Only a Theory by Kenneth Miller. I think that it's a great book. He lays out a lot of really interesting things, and then the final piece of it I think is pretty important. So I think that wraps it up. That gives a little bit of insight into who I am and what my interests are. I read all over the board, so I'm probably not going to have much of a niche here on BookTube simply because I read everything, and we'll see how it goes from there. And if you have any questions, if you would like to ask anything, I can address those in later videos. But until next time, have a good day. Bye.